Hello and welcome to our second episode of the Curve podcast, brought to you by Depro Pumps, the UK's leading independent pump supplier. And in today's episode, I'm very excited to introduce our guest as we talk about all things controls, building controls, pump controls. And as I say, I'm very excited to welcome Tristan Newton from G&G Controls. Thanks so much for coming on, Tristan.
Hello to everyone that's listening. Thank you.
So Tristan, if you want to give a little bit of background, so you're currently commercial director at G&G Controls. Tell us a little bit about the history of G&G and how
Absolutely.
you got there.
So essentially the company started about 25 years ago. Obviously I wasn't there then. The company got its start essentially building pump control panels, typically in wastewater. And so that's what I've been doing for many, many years now. Recently that's grown, over the years that's grown from just wastewater to things like booster sets, so essentially for clean water. And then that's grown further into now full BMS control panels for BMS companies, integrators, that sort of thing. So I've joined the business on the 1st of this year, 1st of January. My background is in construction product manufacturing. So that's where I've come from. I've joined G&G as we're going through a period of significant growth to help go through that scale process, go through those growing pains.
Since you've been at G&G, have you seen any changes or anything impactful that's come in?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So one of the biggest things, it was pre me starting, but one of the big things that's affected the industry has been 18th edition. So anyone in electrics will know what I'm referring to when I say 18th edition. It has made a big impact. So anyone that hasn't got, doesn't know about that, doesn't really understand the changes and implications it has, I'd strongly recommend getting a professional training course on that, take professional advice, because it should be impacting the way anyone working with pumps, control panels, electrics on a day-to-day basis would do their work. So that's super important. Essentially, the thing is, one of the big impacts is for residential applications. So any dwelling, anywhere where somebody is living, enclosures, for example, control panels, can't be made of a combustible material. They have to be non-combustible. So a great example is that the plastic enclosures for old distribution boards are no longer allowed. They have to be a metal enclosure. The other side to that is it has to be non-combustible. Metal is a great example of where that complies. Another example is a polyester, glass fiber reinforced polyester. So for us, we use a product that's been tested up to 900 degrees. So it's a great option where robustness is required. So mild steel has a level of robustness, which is great, but it's not necessarily durable enough for all applications. So these polyester or glass fiber reinforced polyester is a great option for where durability is required, IP rating, because the IP66 rating is required. So that's a great option for those applications.
Amazing. So I guess a lot of the industry has been shaped by legislation.
Absolutely.
Is there any other trends or emerging innovations you've seen kind of driven by anything else externally?
Yeah, well, one minor thing, for example, coming back to regulations is specifically on cabling, where the cable goes into a screwed terminal on, for example, on a DIN rail mounted terminal or any kind of screw terminal, that cable is meant to be ferruled. So you need to ferrule the end of that cable. Now, this is time consuming on site, so it isn't always done because an engineer might not necessarily have a crimp tool, they might not have the right size ferrule, and it's quicker not to do it. So that's one thing where a gap can come in compliance. So it's a really common area where people can accidentally fall down on compliance. Now, to help mitigate that risk for installers, for companies, and leaders of companies, to mitigate that risk for them, one thing we've done is on terminal rails on our control panels, we try to always use now lever terminals, which the beauty of that is they are still compliant even when you don't ferrule the cable. It's still 18th edition compliant. But coming back to your point about future trends and innovations, etc., in the market, One of the common ones on wastewater, which is obviously where we talk to DECPRO and other companies like yourselves a lot, is on wastewater. One of the common issues across the industry has been in wastewater in pits or areas where you're pumping out wastewater is float controls do tend to fail. They can get fouled up, crust build up on top of the tank, and that means the float switches give a bad reading. They give a incorrect reading. So this is quite a common problem. Now, one way to fix that has been with traditional ultrasonics. There's various ultrasonic manufacturers out there, but they tend to have weaknesses around things what's called like a blind area. So when the level gets too close to them, they can't give an accurate reading, which is particularly a problem where you've got a small tank. So if you've got a small area, particularly in a restaurant or maybe a pub in the basement, you've only got a small tank, which is liable to float switches are liable to foul in that sort of situation where you've got rag, things like that going into that pit. But also a ultrasonic doesn't necessarily work because the tank isn't big enough to get an accurate reading. So one of the things that we've been working on in product development essentially is an alternative product. Essentially, it uses radar, very similar to ultrasonic. So it works in the same way. You have a head in the top of the pit or the tank, and that reads the level. Now, the beauty of it is it doesn't have a blind. It doesn't have a minimum area, particularly compared to a traditional ultrasonic. And that's the beauty of that is it's super reliable, unlike float switches, and it also doesn't have the traditional limitations of ultrasonic. So that's just one area we've developed in.
Interesting. That sounds really exciting. Are you seeing many other companies going that way, or is this a G&G speciality?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we have a significant amount of experience and background and knowledge in wastewater. So for us, in wastewater specifically, we tend to be a market leader. But absolutely, it is something that the wider industry is working on, and it's also something actually that the water authorities are looking at now as well as a alternative to the current incumbent that they use.
Amazing. So thinking then about other trends that you've seen over the last sort of several years, are there any that you're seeing or you predict to see in the future?
Good question. So there's one particularly I'm thinking of is around energy efficiency, because obviously a lot of buildings now, a lot of across industries, across platforms, across companies, energy efficiency is becoming a really, really important for obvious reasons. Now, traditionally in a lot of motor control, there's various ways of doing basic motor starting, but in wastewater, particularly in smaller applications where you're only dealing with a few kilowatt pump, maybe less than one up to a few kilowatts, the way it's been done nearly always has been direct online, so with a contactor and overload. Now the problem with that for energy efficiency is it spins the pump from 0 to 100% very, very quickly. There is no ramp up period.
Yeah.
It brings all of the power in. Now, there's two problems with that. One is the amount of essentially energy required to get over the initial inertia just to start the pump. So that creates a massive spike in energy. So obviously, when you see the current draw on a direct online pump, it goes up significantly at the start and then comes back down to the traditional or the full load current of the pump. Now, the other problem with that is it's not necessarily suitable for that pump to run at 100% of when it needs to run. Sometimes it's only suitable for that pump to run at much less, maybe 50, 60% of its maximum speed. So that's the two key problems with direct online. Obviously, there are other things as well, but they're two of the key energy problems. Now, traditionally, inverters have been very, very expensive. So in smaller wastewater applications, particularly where it's not a large, for example, if it's a very large commercial building, it makes sense to put an inverter in that panel.
Yeah.
The capital cost or the upfront cost of the inverter is offset by the massive energy savings. However, the main problem with smaller applications was the upfront cost of the inverters. Now that is changing. There are new manufacturers coming onto the market over the last 20, 30 years that are a significantly better price point. They don't lose anything in reliability, functionality, and the way they've been designed very comprehensively. So traditionally, people have thought of cheaper variable speed drives, inverters, VSDs, as some people call them. Cheap ones are very, very poor, they're liable to fail, etc. And then you have the expensive ones, which are very, very complex, highly engineered, and incredibly expensive. But now what we're essentially seeing is a middle in the market, which is a very cost-effective inverter, but it's still got an exceptional level of engineering, design, product development being put into it to make a great inverter for a lot of applications.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And on our last episode, if you haven't watched it, go check it out. We had our operations manager, Joe Smith, talking a lot about inverter drives and the advancements around that technology. He also
Absolutely.
mentioned about the challenges with budgets, and that's, as much as we'd like it to be on energy efficiencies, budgets are still coming very much at the forefront. Are you
Very
seeing
much.
that, or do you see this mid-range inverter really taking off and helping clients there?
Yeah, we do really. It is definitely there is still a place for contactors and overloads. Direct online pumps. There's still a place for that. So it's not that they're going completely, but absolutely, inverter drive is taking over now in cold water. So booster sets, for example, they have become the norm now for nearly all applications. Wastewater, it hasn't, but it's becoming absolutely more and more. The beauty of it is it gives you other things that Joe mentioned on, such as better control of the application as well. So it's not just the energy efficiency, it's better control as well. So
Brilliant. So then thinking about future trends, and I'm going to shift slightly towards AI. I know it's the hot topic at the moment, as much as it's kind of sort of settled down in recent months, but do you see AI influencing the controls industry whatsoever, or have you already seen any impact from it?
absolutely. So it it will AI it will have an impact on the controls industry. It's just a case of where. So it's not going to take over the design and manufacture of control panels, but it's more about AI will play a part in how a control panel is designed and made. So, for example, a great one that anyone can try out. There's an AI model called Anthropic. Anyone can go look it up. It's a free model. It has the ability to read or look at and understand a electrical control panel wiring diagram, which is a great example of where AI is starting to come in, where it can help perhaps a new engineer or someone in training. So you can upload a wiring diagram into Anthropic. It will read it and give you a brief overview of what that control panel is designed to do. So that's a great example of where first steps have been made in AI. It will absolutely come in. So one interesting example is, so machine learning has been happening for a very long time. People don't necessarily understand that machine learning is almost a precursor or part of, or almost it is AI, artificial intelligence. So machine learning is being done significantly by product manufacturers. Now, one example of that would be, again, with inverters, where they're looking at how an inverter is, the energy consumption of that inverter. Now, one thing, for example, is deragging mode. So where a pump, suddenly the energy consumption of a pump increases on a wastewater application, the algorithm or the brain, the controller can look at that and understand that that's abnormal activity, and it can then reverse the motor to try and clear what is potentially a blockage before spinning it back up in the forward direction again. So that's an example of where actually machine learning has been already implemented and is in use today in many pump applications. Where the industry will go next with machine learning and artificial intelligence in control panels, it's an open debate. There are many things around building controls specifically. So of course we deal in BMS as well a lot. That's an area where there is a lot of machine learning and artificial intelligence being implemented into software to try and understand a building's energy consumption and gain insights around how that building can reduce its energy consumption without reducing the level of service. Of course, nobody wants to turn the cold tap on and nothing comes out, so you can't turn off cold water booster sets. But it's around looking at where energy savings can be made. Can boiler temperatures, hot water temperatures be reduced in the summer? Those sorts of things. But rather than it being done on a manual process, it's a case of building it into an algorithm. But it's an exciting area for the industry, and it's certainly being worked on actively.
Yeah, it sounds very exciting. So thinking about customization, is that an area that G&G has explored, and is it one that's important to your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So with nearly all control panels, at the moment, the vast majority of control panels fit into two categories. So you've got standardized panels. So typically where you've got a product manufacturer making a product, they fit a standardized panel to that product. So whether that product is a standardized wastewater pump or a booster pump or a boiler, all those sorts of applications, they fit a standardized panel to that. Then you have the other side of the market, which is essentially generalized or bespoke panels, and they are designed on a one-off basis for that site, depending on what type of pumps it is, what the applications are. If it's going in a cold area, it might need a heater. If it's going in an exposed area, it needs an IP66 UV balanced enclosure. So you have really two sides: standardized product-based panels and bespoke-based panels. Now, the bespoke panels are it's super important to clients to have them as bespoke. But what is becoming very, very clear is having that bespoke element is making it very, very complex for engineers, site installers, that sort of thing. Because every time they're going to a site, it's a different application, it's a different panel, and it's a different there's a different set of problems to be looking out for. So one of the things we're really working towards is completely reducing that level of complexity for site engineers. So a small announcement I can make today, we've been doing, this is kind of new, but we've been conducting field trials of a new product called telemetrics. So essentially that is a control panel with remote monitoring or telemetry built into it as a integrated panel component. Now, one of the really interesting things about that is that one panel can do many different things as one panel. So the same panel, for example, can take either a single phase or three phase with neutral supply, which for telemetry, that's very new. Normally, it would always require a neutral. It isn't. A three phase is suitable supply for telemetrics. And also it means that you've got two different types of panel in terms of three phase or single phase. That's different again for telemetrics. It can take either single or three phase with the same panel. And again, there's other things built right into it. More product features will be brought out over the next few months. If anyone wants to keep up to date, our website is probably the best place for that. But yeah, it's an important area where we can take out the complexity for site engineers, still offer the features that customers are looking for, but standardizing it and reducing the areas of variation that each site is different.
Yeah, that is exciting news. And we'll post all of the links in the captions to this podcast, so do check them out. So that feels like it solves very much a challenge for a lot of engineers as well.
Absolutely, yeah. It's actually an area where a lot of companies, so when we're talking to our customers, it's something they ask us for repeatedly, a telemetry solution. There is no one standard product across the market that all pump companies can use. It's very diverse. There's lots and lots of different options, all of which have different strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, another common one is people say, well, we've got a SIM card GSM or telemetry system in this panel. However, the site's in the basement, it has almost no signal. We don't tend to get any text from it at all, and it's not really any use to us because it has no signal. So the beauty of telemetrics is it can do Wi-Fi or internet cables, like a broadband cable can be plugged directly into it, or it can have a SIM card. So, and that's the same panel, can take all three of those connection options, which means it gets around the problem whereby if you've got it in a basement, it doesn't have a phone signal, but if it's going in the middle of a field somewhere, it doesn't have any Wi-Fi or Ethernet cable or broadband cable can't be run to that. So it means that one panel can be used for all those different applications.
Amazing. Yeah, that does sound really exciting. Are you thinking about, sort of the challenges and how you're offering these innovative solutions to them. Are there any other common client challenges that you've seen and helped solve?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say one of the things is around understanding what is required of a panel. So typically, a site engineer doesn't need to and doesn't tend to understand every nuance of a control panel. What's it doing? What's it got in it? What's it not doing? How is the control philosophy? What's required? Do you need a breaker this side of the transformer? What kind of size transformer? So that there is very can be very complex for a site engineer to try and understand every time. Of course, they're dealing with many other things as well as that. So one of the things we try to always do is take that complexity away from for customers. So one thing is rather than the customers saying to us, we need a panel, we need contactors and overloads in it, and we need this size overload range, and we need these breakers in it. So what we say now is just send us a photo with the information you require. So have you got a panel there you're directly replacing? Have you got new pumps going into that panel, going into the application? You need a panel for it to control. Send us a photo of the rating plate for that pump. We'll design the panel to be exactly what you require. So it just takes that design pain, that headache of trying to work out all the details for our customers. They can focus on talking to their customer, solving the customer's problem, give us the information we need in terms of what pump, how many pumps, what's the requirement on site, how they're being controlled, and we'll design everything else around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point, and it's something that resonates that we do also here at DeckPro. Having that sort of deep-rooted specialist knowledge, we're not trying to cut anyone out, but we can offer that sort of, like
Absolutely.
I say, deep-rooted knowledge around a specialist niche area, such
Absolutely.
as controls and pumps. Really interesting. Thinking about the clients again then, and sort of around efficiencies, is there any sort of practical examples where you've helped or demonstrated improved efficiencies for clients with controls?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So as a product manufacturer, we don't tend to be involved with the site side. So for us, it's sometimes hard to understand the energy savings and that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
But slightly to one side, because we work with a lot of BMS contractors, BMS integrators, they do amazing work with BMS and energy saving. So of course, all of our non-BMS panels, so all our wastewater and clean water systems would always have volt-free connections. Now the beauty of volt-free connections is they go back to the BMS, so the BMS panel has a complete picture of what's happening in the building. Now, our BMS customers we work with, a shout out to people like Eon Controls, they do amazing work with reading all the energy consumption of a building, and that's looking at everything in the building. It's not just looking at a small area and saying, how can we optimize this? How can we use the shading, the air conditioning, the boilers, the cold water, the hot water to optimize the overall energy efficiency of a building? And they make some incredible savings where the initial investment of putting in a full BMS system is recouped in just in 1 year, just due to the energy savings. So while we don't so much directly do it, some of our customers do an amazing job.
Yeah, definitely. If you could sum it up then into perhaps 2 or 3 top tips that you would pass on in terms of efficiencies with pump controls or building management systems, what would they be?
Absolutely. So the first thing would be around looking at the starting method, which is going essentially from DOL to inverter. That would be the biggest single thing I would look at doing. The other thing I'd look at doing is the specification required. So sometimes it's super easy to say, we've got this application, so we're going to just put this in. Looking at it deeply and thoughtfully around what's actually required, what's the job that needs to be done here, rather than just a direct replacement, for example, is another one. Where the problem with the direct replacement is it can mean an oversize or over specification of a pump, where a smaller pump could make energy savings and capital savings. They're probably the two of the biggest things for me.
So then finally, final thoughts. Where would you say, or what advice would you give to clients who are thinking about upgrading their controls? And why should they choose G&G?
Yeah, great question. So for clients, we'd never be talking to a end client directly. We'd always be working with someone like yourselves. So we'd always be very much working as a partner, as a overall solution. So we'd work with a BMS company or a pump company, for example, to help provide you with a solution to your client. Now, the thing that sets us apart really is our expertise in designing a suitable product for that exact application. And so when you've got as opposed to a generalist or a general manufacturer, for example, we consider ourselves designers and manufacturers of specialist product, and that can involve looking at things that wouldn't necessarily be considered. What the specific breaker types required for this application? It's not generally it's not an interesting topic, but for us, it's something that our technical team work on constantly to make sure we're supplying the best product to our clients, who are then giving the best overall package to their end user.
So it sounds like it's a really exciting time for G&G and the industry.
Absolutely.
And some really great tech and advancements are coming out. Thanks so much, Tristan. This has been really insightful. I've definitely learned a lot. Was there any other additions you wanted to add before we sign off?
The only thing I'd say is keep an eye on our LinkedIn page and our website, but always try to put updates on there. So feel free to reach out to us. We do respond to messages on our website, messages on LinkedIn. Our contact details are on there. So always glad to hear from anybody.
Perfect. And I can second that. The LinkedIn activity for G&G is very, very interesting. So I'm a follower. And thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you.
Thanks, and we will speak to you soon.